Good morning, everyone. I'm Crystal Logan, Vice President of Community Programs and Engagement, and I'm honored to welcome you to this very special occasion. People may be trickling in as we go. We have a lot of people registered for this morning, so hopefully they all show up. But thanks to you all for being here. It was in the summer of 1949 when 2,000 curious and earnest people came to Aspen to attend the Goethe Bicentennial celebration. There are books written about this transformative event, and we are all the beneficiaries of the spark that was lit during those 2 weeks. As we begin our community celebration today, I want to say a few words about what this day is meant to celebrate beyond the significance of the milestone of reaching 75 years. It's about community. It's about celebrating our community here in the Valley. It's about celebrating the larger community that's been forged over 75 years of convenings. It's about the community building skills we all hone in our daily lives and the many friendships made and conversations enjoyed when various groups gather to learn and grow together. You all have contributed to this community. I see many familiar faces, former colleagues, participants, trustees, donors, volunteers, alumni, moderators. You all have helped us make this magic happen. Today is a thank you gift to you all for helping us not only keep the magic alive, but to help it flourish and to make a positive impact in our Valley-wide community and beyond. As many of you know, the Aspen Community Programs Department is the Institute's year-round public program in Aspen. My team, thank you, Zoe Brown, Katie Carlson, and Ari Mizrahi. We host over 60 days of programming every year for residents and visitors, including teenagers. We host the Leadership and Values seminars for teens starting in 8th grade and through high school, along with a variety of stimulating and timely programs for adults. And thank you, Albert Breyfogle, one of our most important moderators who leads those teen programs. I encourage you to visit our website, but I'm assuming that if you're all here, you're probably on my mailing list and have been to our website. But please join us and support us in any way you can. These programs are affordable and accessible and open to all. As we celebrate our 75th anniversary, we also honor the Aspen Skiing Company, and now it's called Aspen One, for their monumental role in creating the quality of life we enjoy here in the Valley. Having the Crown family at the helm of the company has been a boon to us all. Not only have they invested profits back in the company, but they've invested in all our communities through the Aspen Community Foundation. We're grateful for their support in today's program. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge and honor the Pepke family. We cannot overstate the importance of the vision and contributions of our founders, Elizabeth and Walter Pepke. As we marvel at the foresight and brilliance of what they have created here, I want to thank all the Pepke family members, including Tony Pepke DeBrule, Tony Zersher and John Kelly, Ariane Zersher, Nick and Maya DeBrule, Jennifer DeBrule and Derek Foster, and the Nitza family, Ann Nitza and her children Charles, Marina, and Paul. A few announcements before we start our event. After this session, please join us for our free community lunch in the Koch building. We'll have seating in the Mayor Courtyard, the Koch patio, on the lawn. We have a special gift for all of you, so please join us for the lunch. And then please be back here promptly at 1 for our next panel. We also have several mementos in the lobby to commemorate this occasion, so please take one. And now to our event. I'm delighted to introduce Paul Andersen and Todd Breyfogle. As many of you know, Paul has lived in the Valley for over 40 years and has been writing award-winning books screenplays, newspaper and magazine articles, as well as poetry and songs. Fortunately for us, the Aspen Times gave him the Aspen Institute beat in the early 80s, so he's been forging his relationship with us since then. And now he's become more deeply involved with us as our wilderness guide for our seminar participants and moderator for our very popular Great Books program. Earlier this year, Paul was inducted into the Aspen Hall of Fame, and we're delighted to have his new book about Dr. Schweitzer and the Aspen Idea in the lobby as our gift for you all. Todd Breyfogle is Senior Advisor for Humanistic Studies and Practices at the Aspen Institute. Before assuming his current role, he led the Institute's Seminars Department for 17 years, overseeing our executive leadership seminars, custom leadership seminars, the Justice and Society program, which was founded by Justice Harry Blackmun, and the Office of Curriculum and Moderators. A Colorado native, he earned his BA at Colorado College. He attended Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar and earned his PhD at the University of Chicago. Please join me in welcoming Paul Andersen and Todd Breyfogle. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Crystal, and it's such a delight to be in conversation with Paul Andersen, as always. Thank you all for coming, but before we start, we should all give a special thanks to Crystal and her team. As you know, if you've participated in anything, they are a small but mighty team, and it is impossible to overestimate the work that goes into the 60-plus programs in a 365-day year. So the intelligence, grace, and generosity of spirit that they bring is part of what we're here to celebrate today. And just to give you a little bit of a sense of how we'll proceed for the next 50 minutes or so, the Aspen Idea is so much about conversation, and so Paul and I are going to be in conversation for a little bit, and then we're going to open things up to questions from the audience so that we can have a conversation sort of on and off the stage. But by way of setting the tone, but also reiterating some of the things that Crystal said, out on the table, and please be modest but indulgent, Paul's latest book, I think it's 16 or 17, we both have lost track, is on Albert Schweitzer's visit to Aspen here in 1949, and the Aspen Idea then and now, and we'll be exploring some of those themes in our conversation. There are also a couple of little tidbits, a short history of the Aspen Institute, a very short history of the Aspen Institute, a survey of the many Institute programs. Those of us who work for the Institute sometimes find it difficult even to grasp comprehensively the many things that happen outside of the Valley, and indeed outside of Washington, D.C., or New York, or San Francisco. So I encourage you to take those. And there's a little bit, Walter Paepke's Container Corporation of America for 25 years published great ideas advertisements in Time and Life, and we've reproduced a couple of those as postcards for you. And then finally, there's a small exhibition of original material, and by original, I mean original, so please keep sticky fingers off of it, but feel free to handle it otherwise. Original advertising material, the LP of Albert Schweitzer's lecture here in German, and this, which is an original program from 1949, this one here happens to be signed by Albert Schweitzer, so I'll welcome you to fondle it, but not walk away with it. But there's something about this celebration, the celebration that we had in town a couple of weeks ago, where the city and county honored Albert Schweitzer with an Albert Schweitzer Day proclamation for July 1st. We're looking backwards so that we can actually look more critically at the present and creatively about the future. And that was the spirit in which the Paepkes and others who founded, who organized the Goethe Bicentennial in 1949 and then founded the Aspen Institute for Humanistic Studies, wanted to do. They saw themselves as part of a great conversation. And so before we get into a conversation with Paul Andersen, I wanted to set the stage a little bit. This is what the program opened with in 1949. The difficulty of our time is a difficulty of the human spirit. We have had to abandon the illusion, which some of our ancestors were able to cherish, that our difficulty is primarily political, economic, technological, or educational. The social order has been rearranged, and old evils appear under new names. Literacy has flourished, and taste has been debased. Goods have been produced and distributed in untold quantities, and blown up in untold quantities. Things seem to be bigger, they do not seem to be better. We are at last face to face with the fact that our difficulty is a difficulty of the human spirit. It sounds like it could have been written yesterday, except we don't write like this anymore. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but in these circumstances, it is not unreasonable to turn for more light to a man born 200 years ago, or 2000, or 20. And it goes on to say, if Goethe's time has any particular relevance, it was that Goethe himself was at the intersection of the end of the old era and the dawn of the technological age. He understood the transition from aristocratic to democratic culture. He understood the ways in which specialization was beginning to separate not only how we integrate our knowledge of the world, but how we separate ourselves from each other and from nature. And so in organizing the Goethe Bicentennial, they chose Goethe in part as a mirror in which we could begin to see ourselves, and they chose Albert Schweitzer as sort of emblematic of that Goethean spirit, a living exemplar who provided a kind of mirror, not an instruction manual, but a mirror in which we could become more reflective. And so the program introduction ends in this way. If man is somehow one, and if the world is somehow one, it is not too soon to wonder what it is that unifies both man and the world. World organization will be human community, or it will not be at all. World organization will be a human community, or it will not be at all. These are the thoughts, I think, of Robert Hutchins, the Chancellor of the University of Chicago, who had overseen the Manhattan Project. So as we think about 2 world wars and the Great Depression, having a mirror in which to reevaluate ourselves was important. And the great society, fully, even distractedly conscious of its divergences and distinctions, will not become the human community until it finds the common spirit that is man. We try here to undeceive and fortify ourselves. We turn here to Goethe and search him, the better to turn to and search ourselves and cry, more light, more light. That's what we've tried to do for 75 years at the Aspen Institute. It's what so many of you here in the Valley try to do in your organizations, and the way in which you try to inhabit this ideal of mind, body, and spirit. And it's what we'll try to do today, not just to celebrate the past, but to do so in a way that it continues to come to life in the present. So with that brief introduction, I'm very happy to be in conversation with Paul. And we thought what we would do is talk a little bit about Albert Schweitzer's visit to Aspen in 1949, and then talk a little bit about Schweitzer, the person, as an exemplar, and then finally a little bit about the way that continues to manifest itself at the Aspen Institute, but also in our experience of this particularly special place in the world. So, Paul, in the book, you went through and detailed the visit that Schweitzer made here to Aspen. And so I wonder if you could just give a quick summary, but also of Schweitzer's visit, not the book, but then also sort of what captivated you as you explored the fact that this living saint, born in Alsace, who'd spent a lot of his life in equatorial West Africa, came by steamship and train to Aspen in 1949, quite improbably.
Improbable indeed. First of all, I was hoping on a full hall here, and yet it's heartening to know that most Aspenites otherwise are out hiking in the mountains and experiencing the natural world, and that's what I think Schweitzer would have approved of. Nature was a huge component in his life and a huge influence. I know, for example, Bill Sterling just walked twice over West Maroon Pass and taking in the wildflowers and the absolute majesty of this place. So when I first came to Aspen, it was actually 1966. I was 15 years old. I was a Midwestern skier. And Aspen opened my eyes to big mountains, and I could never ski at the landfill in Wilmot again. And then when I decided to move over from Crested Butte, where I was living for 15 years, and ran the newspaper there, my friends would say, "My God, Paul, what are you doing? Moving to the Sodom and Gomorrah of the Elk Range?" I mean, so I came with a little bit of trepidation to Aspen, but as Crystal mentioned, I inherited the beats of the senior reporters who didn't want them anymore. And that meant the Aspen Institute, the Aspen Center for Theoretical Physics, the Music Festival, and the International Design Conference. Thank you. That really made my adult education real and tangible, and I loved it. So the first thing I did was to begin to research what is the history of this place, because unless you know the backstory, it's all sort of superficial. So when I learned about Albert Schweitzer's visit here and this visit by this incredible exemplar, I thought, well, here's the counterpoint to Aspen's otherwise material sort of persona or fame and popularity. And what Schweitzer brought here was perhaps the most elevated experience, morally and ethically, Aspen has ever had. It's all gone downhill since then. No, it still exists here. And so there's an interesting contrast of values in Aspen. It makes it a very dynamic, contentious place that keeps the great conversation of man alive and vibrant. So Schweitzer's visit to Aspen, he, at age 30, determines to give his life to medical study and then medical treatment of the underserved in Africa, which is now Gabon, West Africa, Lambaréné, a French colony at that time. And Schweitzer, at age 30, then becomes a physician and goes to Africa, and basically he said, "My life is my argument." For any naysayers who speculated that he may have been a colonist or a racist, he said, my life is my argument. And his life was indeed outstanding in what he gave and what he did. So he is in a very rural part of Africa with very little funding. The facilities are makeshift. For the first year of the clinic, he's using an old chicken coop for his clinic. I mean, it's very rudimentary. And then he starts to hear, well, in 1947, I believe he received his first communication from the University of Chicago, Robert Maynard Hutchins and Antonio Borghese, a professor there, who hatched this idea of holding a Goethe bicentennial celebration here in Aspen. And why was that in Aspen? It was because, as Hutchins said, there's nothing better than a captive audience. You bring people to a remote place, and they're there for that purpose only. No distractions like they would have had in Chicago. So Albert Schweitzer is invited to give the keynote address. He's offered a sum of money, approximately $6,000, to leave his hospital. He's aged, my age, when he arrived here, 74 years old, with his wife, Helena. And the story is kind of lore now, but he takes a ship. They take a ship to New York and get off, and the media just surrounds him. He's a fascination to American media because he is this, quote, living saint, a title that he really tried to shrug off. But so he's really kind of hounded by the press, and he's a self-effacing man. It's difficult for him. He moves on to Chicago, and the same thing there. The media hounds him. He said at one of his places where he was staying, the piano tuner came in, and because he, of course, could not leave his instrument. And the piano tuner, he realizes is taking photographs and sort of a subversive undercover reporter. So it's in Chicago where Albert Schweitzer is told that he's got a misunderstanding. He thought since all the stationery he had received pertaining to the Goethe bicentennial was from Chicago, that Aspen was a suburb of that city. And he was told, no, Dr. Schweitzer, you need to go 1,000 miles further west, up to 8,000 feet in elevation. And he said, Gott in Himmel, or something like that. Actually, what he said when he came here and began to breathe Aspen's rarefied air, he said, Aspen ist so nach an den Himmel gebaut. Aspen is built too close to heaven. He was afraid the gates would open and take him here. He survived. He gave his speech twice, once in French, once in German, in a high-pitched, almost a schoolboy voice. He didn't have this basso profundo that you would think would come from this visage. But he spoke, of course, adoringly about Goethe, and that set this tone for Aspen that, to me, is phenomenal, and it's a great counterpoint again to the kind of pervasive image Aspen has in the world.
And as you were sort of going through not only the Pepke archives and looking at some of the other material about Schweitzer's visit here, were there particular things that surprised you, either about the visit or about the man in particular?
The man is still an amazement to me. I conjure his image, his spirit here, to walk the path that he had walked to the music tent, and to realize that he was here, brief visit, 3 days, but in those 3 days, what he brought here was this purity of spirit that I think is so unusual. And one thing that really strikes me is that we revere this man. We put him head and shoulders above the rest of us. Why? Because he followed his deepest moral precept. Isn't that something we should all do? How do we rise to Schweitzer's level? How do we look at him in admiration without a little bit of regret about maybe our own failings to be as pure of spirit as he was?
One of the things that he emphasizes in his speech here in Aspen is the importance of kindness, that kindness is the highest expression of love, in part because it recognizes the dignity of the human person, but also, as he put it, it embodied a kind of reverence for life, which was a phrase that was so important to him. And it manifests itself quite early in his life. He had a religious upbringing, was ordained, was a theologian, obviously a scholar of Bach, but also an organist, a medical doctor, who took his medical skills to equatorial West Africa, not as a colonial imposition, but as he put it, an act of atonement for colonialism, that for every act of colonization, each European had some duty to ameliorate some of that had happened. And he had a strong ethical framework, some of which we'll explore this afternoon in the Flash seminar if you come back for that. Which emphasized that we had a moral duty to be kind, not just to our fellow human beings, but to all of life. And again, I think that manifests itself here, broadly speaking, in the reverence that we try to cultivate, and that Crystal pointed out even with the skiing company. Imperfectly, because we're imperfect beings, but as an aspiration, this exemplarity is still really quite compelling. And he held a mirror up to the contemporary culture and said, we talk about dignity, we talk about human rights, and then we engage in all of this degrading colonial, military, economic, and technological exploitation. How are we going to sort of reconcile ourselves to that. We were talking, beforehand as we were thinking about what direction this conversation might take, and you were pointing out that he sees this statue, this sculpture. Could you say a little bit more about that as an example of his ethical framework?
Albert Schweitzer really had two, what I would call epiphanies in his life. One was in a French village in the northeastern part of France near the German border. He was Alsatian, by the way, and so kind of spanned that border. And Colmar, France, what they call the Little Venice, because it has canals. It's a very scenic, picturesque place. And in Colmar is a statue that was sculpted by Bertolli, who also sculpted the Statue of Liberty. And it's an image of a semi-reclining black African man who has his head bowed in a kind of a melancholic expression of sorrow and contemplation. And as a child, Schweitzer visited Colmar many times with his family, and he would always petition his parents to take him on this particular boulevard so he could look at that image, and that image conveyed something to him. I mean, he had always been a moral avatar, but this really clarified for him something of a visceral nature, something very tangible, and that resided in him, and really is what prompted him to go to Africa, was this image. So art becomes an influence on this man. Another epiphany Schweitzer had was when he was in Africa. He had been searching all his adult life for a unifying theory of morality or ethics, and he couldn't quite put his finger on it. And he was at one point on a small steamer on the Ogawe River, going to minister to someone in the outlying area. And he was taking notes, he was writing, he was thinking. Thought to him was the essential ingredient to any kind of a manifestation of an ideal, of a plan. So he's thinking diligently and writing copiously. And then he takes his eyes off the paper and he looks at the river, and the steamer is navigating through some rapids, and he sees pods of hippos on the side of the river with the big, massive hippos and then their babies. And he recognizes the strength and beauty of nature, but also the vulnerability of these smaller hippos. And something triggers in him this phrase, reverence for life. And that became his mantra, his raison d'etre, his reason to be, was to revere all life. And just to share something with you from a speech that Elizabeth Pepke made in 1966, she quotes Schweitzer as she discusses, she defines it a childish prayer, but it conveys what he thought. "O Heavenly Father, protect and bless all things that have breath, guard them from all evil, and let them sleep in peace." He said the problem with ethics to date is that it only extends man to man in the human environment. He said we need to extend it universally to everything that lives, everything that even culminates in the act of life. So his view was cosmic and all engulfing of existence.
And Schweitzer was raised a Christian, we might say even a certain fundamentalist version of Christianity, which he had always struggled with, and then becomes extremely enamored, especially of Hinduism. And listening to your story, it occurs to me that the gospel according to Schweitzer might begin, "Blessed are the hippos," which is not a bad place for philosophy to start. But I wonder if we might move from Schweitzer sort of in a little bit more to the contemporary time and place, because I know you're fond of talking about the gospel according to Paul. But before we get that, I will embarrass Paul slightly by saying one of the things that's been wonderful about getting to know Paul over the last 20 years or so is the way he's sort of metabolized not just a lot of the thinking of the human conversation, but especially the experience of nature. And if you've ever had the privilege of going for a walk, even a short one with Paul, you get that sense. And I'm going to, I didn't tell you I was going to do this, but Paul recently, his previous book, most recently, was a book of poetry. And so before we get to the gospel according to Paul, I wanted to read this, if I can find my glasses, wherever they went. Thanks. And so this is a section, a selection from Paul's most recent book of poetry. Nature's beauty inspires awe, touching deep our human core. Beauty sublime in wilderness raw, made known in tales and lore. Our senses perceive something divine, channeling our distant past. We know it as something undefined, but with reverence we firmly grasp. Creation is life, what some call God, all from the same unknowable source, malleable clay, the impressionable clod, traveling upon an unknown course. And that echoes Schweitzer's reverence for life. So I wonder if you could say more about how you've arrived at that vision of the world.
Yeah, I guess like Schweitzer, I feel kind of like a druid or a pagan. I mean, but nature, it's my church. It's as close as I can get to pristine creation, and so nature is a very powerful experience for me, and has been for most of my life. Recently, just about a year ago or so, there was a movement to reaffirm Albert Schweitzer's influence on Aspen. And this came out of a talk that was given at the Aspen Chapel by a man named Lachlan Farrow, who is a Schweitzer scholar and an MD. And we had the pleasure of being with him this summer for a visit. Anyway, that compelled certain community members, Bill Sterling among them, Greg Poshman, county commissioners, Amy Honey of the Aspen Historical Society, and a few other people, J.R. Atkins, minister at the community church, community church, anyway, to reinvoke the name of Albert Schweitzer and attach it to Aspen as a revival on the which birthday is it of Schweitzer?
It's the 150th anniversary of Schweitzer's birth this year, 76th of his visit to Aspen, but 150th of his birth. Yeah.
So that is what really spurred me to write the book, Dr. Schweitzer at the Birth of the Aspen Idea. Is like I needed something, some kind of a tag to put that book out. So that inspired me to write the book and really encapsulate Schweitzer's visit. But what happened, we had an Albert Schweitzer Day about 3 weeks ago, and a man named Jim Withers, Dr. Jim Withers, was brought into Aspen. Jim Withers is a street doctor. He's an MD, a physician. He tends to people in urban areas who cannot access medical help because they're homeless. He walks the streets with a backpack and gives care and succor to those who can't find it elsewhere, the cast-offs. He is a Schweitzer emulate. And Greg Poshman knew him because he made a film about him. So Jim Withers came here and gave 2 talks, one at Takah at El Jebel, and then one at the Historical Society here. So to bring that kind of star power, if you will, back to Aspen and remember the higher values and ideals, that's what the future portends now that we have this sort of inertia building. on maintaining that high level. So Albert Schweitzer, again, an echo of his visit remains here.
And before we turn things over to question and answer from the audience, I'm curious, Paul, if you were to have dinner with Albert Schweitzer, what's the one question that you'd want to ask him?
Would you like to take a walk? I would love to just take a walk with Albert Schweitzer and listen to the birds and observe the trees and talk about the mountains and sit quietly with him at a riverside, to be in his presence. And I think this is something, another amazing thing about him is that the people in his presence felt something about him. They felt who he was. And there's an expression of humanism that emulated from him. It's shining his love light, if you will. And that is something that we can all do with our graciousness and our humanness. So, yeah, it would be a blessing to have a dinner with Albert. But what about you? What would you want to ask him?
I wouldn't be able to limit myself to one question, because so many of the things that I'm interested in and have been were things that he was much more expert in than I will ever be. But I love the music of Johann Sebastian Bach, about whom he wrote 2 volumes of scholarship and obviously played a lot of the organ works. So I'd probably ask him a question about Bach's keyboard works. But it would be hard not to talk about theology and nature, and I've never seen a hippo in the wild, but someday I hope to. And I think, as I've come to study him more, particularly in this 75th anniversary year, I will say that Schweitzer, I did a PhD in social and political philosophy, in which I think Schweitzer never came up whatsoever. And so he's one of those people who is such a powerful mind and spirit and example that he gets ignored in academic literature, oddly enough. And as I've delved into the 3 volumes of his work on ethics, and it's not easy, certainly in English, I've come to both wrestle with his thinking, but also appreciate something that you were alluding to earlier, and that is that the way we think about the world, the manifestation of thought, especially as he critiques it, the Western tradition, is our imposition of thought on the natural world. And he kept emphasizing, I think as you've been suggesting also, that in fact we need to be receptive and let our thoughts be formed by our observations of nature and of human nature. And he has this line to the effect that thought at that point drifts into mysticism, which is to say that this is a question to Schweitzer, I promise. Modern ways of knowing have been reduced and limited to one narrow, material, scientific way of knowing. But how we know whether I'm sitting here next to Paul is different from how I know 1 + 1 is 2, which is different from how I know my sister loves me, right? Or how a reverence for life can be an expression and a reception of love. So I think I might ask him something about how his thinking about how we know and experience the world had come to be what it is. But I would make it a shorter question.
So just one little vignette before we go to the questions. Reverence for life. How do we practice reverence for life? Schweitzer, just to give an example, when he was at his Bush Hospital, he was writing diligently. He was always writing or studying music. And he sequestered himself in a small palapa, a palm frond covered structure, and it was sweltering hot in equatorial Africa. So he had the window open, and his only light was a kerosene lantern. And he's in there studying. And an insect would occasionally fly in and go to the light and be incinerated by the lantern. And Schweitzer just could not handle that death. So instead of enduring that, he closed the window so that the insects could not come in any longer. And then he just endured the stifling heat as almost a sort of a penance, which was a lot of what his trip to Africa was about, penance for what the white man had done to the black man. And so he was self-sacrificing, and to the extreme, I think that most of us would agree is very difficult to match.
And I take consolation that when the Dalai Lama was here, whatever it was, 15 years ago, he expressed also a reverence for life. But one of the limit cases was he had no qualms about squashing the mosquito. So let's take some questions, and we'll do 2 or 3 or 4 questions at a time so that we can get as many questions in as possible. And Paul and I will take turns answering what seems to capture us most immediately. But here are the rules. If you have a question, it should be 1 sentence with 1 maximum semicolon, and there should be a question mark at the end. And so we'll do rapid fire, get 3 or 4 questions on, and then we'll go back to the audience for 3 more. There are a couple of people in the audience, with microphones, so, and it's hard to see from up here, so take it away. We've got 2 hands here. So, and 1 hand over there, my loving sister.
Thank you all so much for this illuminating discussion. I just would mention that in the mid-'80s, we moved the sculpture of Albert Schweitzer from the Institute setting here to the park downtown, Papka Park. And it's over in the corner in a rather sort of bucolic setting there, so that people just visiting in town could get to it with great ease. But not everyone, of course, understands that. I moved to Aspen simply because I was looking for a little bit of New York City at 8,000 feet, and it was so near the forest. And my question is I think there's a perception that Albert Schweitzer was a very strong Christian, but you touched on that just a little bit, Paul. Could you elucidate on that a little bit more?
Well, we'll come back to that. We'll get a couple more questions in. But I'm really curious, where on campus was the sculpture originally? I didn't know that.
I'm not sure exactly where it was here on the campus. I'm not sure.
Thanks. We'll go here and then over here.
You both are magnificent storytellers. I could sit here for hours to listen to you. And while I was listening, I kept thinking about how I could capture this to my 3 kids, because I want them to know about Albert Schweitzer. And when I do that, what's a story about his life I should not leave out?
All right.
Thank you both for being here. My one question is pretty simple, but very difficult. What would Schweitzer think of AI and how that interacts with humans and nature at this point in time?
Right. Wow. Christianity, children, and AI. Where do you want to go?
Well, let's start with Bill. Bill, when I guide for the Aspen Institute, I get my groups, my seminar groups, which, thanks to Todd. Todd has been my supporter here for many years, and I'm extremely in his debt for bringing me on board to guide for the seminar group. So I get 2 opportunities with these groups. I take them into nature first and give them the gospel according to Paul. And then I take them on a town tour and give them a cultural view. I go to the Schweitzer bust at Papka Park, and it sits on a marble block, and I kind of lament. I say, this ought to be elevated. This should be much more visible. This deserves much more acknowledgement because Schweitzer was such an important factor for Aspen. And then Bill said, well, Paul, we thought about that, but really, because Albert Schweitzer was self-effacing and humble, this is the appropriate location for him, under the boughs of these beautiful spruce trees. So well done on placing the bust there. As far as Schweitzer's Christianity goes, he was He was a scholar of Jesus. He was not a dogmatic Christian by any means. He was, Christ was his exemplar and his teacher, which I think is what allowed him to elevate himself to the position he did, to emulate the greatest moral avatar that he could ever imagine. So it was Jesus, but not a dogmatic view of Jesus. Jesus as a historical figure.
And an expansion, I think, of a more broader spiritual awareness, but also of the, as I was suggesting before, the means by which we apprehend the divine in the world. So he was very enamored of Hinduism. If you're at all familiar with the kind of Quaker Illuminist tradition, that might also kind of capture the quasi-mysticism that he had in his Christianity. But he was almost excommunicated from his initial denomination, and then left, became ordained in another denomination. But over the course of his life, there was that sense of expansiveness to various religious traditions and modes of apprehending the divine. There's something about the statue or the sculpture that brought something to mind to me. There's a distinction we might make between an icon and an idol. Right? An idol is something that attracts your gaze, and you attach your gaze to the idol. An icon is something that attracts your gaze and directs your gaze to something that's behind it. And I think Christ for Schweitzer was an icon properly that had become an organized religion and idol. And similarly, I think Schweitzer himself, one of the reasons that he's not so well studied or even necessarily well known is that he wanted to be the person, not the celebrity. As Paul said, he was very self-effacing. But he wanted to be the person who sort of allowed the light to shine through him, so that when you were attracted to him, you weren't attracted to him, but to the light that was shining through. And that captures a little bit, I think, of his sense of religiosity, but also of the kind of oneness of the world. And what that means for children, I don't know at the moment, because we're trying to raise a 17-year-old for whom the idol, of course, is the thing that stops your gaze. It's about this big and has access to everything in the world. And so, in a way, it's, I think, more about a Schweitzerian disposition to the world to be receptive to what's there, rather than to fixate on the many idols that our culture gives. It's interesting you ask about AI, because one of my colleagues for the health program at the beginning of the Ideas Festival had a hologram made of Albert Schweitzer to welcome people to the health festival. And I had never seen a hologram before, and I'd certainly never seen Schweitzer. And it was magnificent, the text, the technology. Schweitzer spoke perfect English with a German accent, which of course he didn't do in 1949. He didn't speak English at all. But it made Schweitzer, as it were, come alive in a slightly different way. But I think what Schweitzer would reflect on with respect to AI is that AI is really, really good at producing information. But as T.S. Eliot says, what is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? What is the knowledge we have lost in information? And even in 1949, it was an information-rich world. And Schweitzer stood as emblematic of the quest for wisdom. And in a way, I think that's also perhaps the answer to the question, Maria, that you made about children. We're so fixated on the ways in which technical information allows us to do things in the world. And Schweitzer reminds us that life and living is a practice of being in the world, and that being is properly relational to ourselves, to each other, to the natural world around us. And of course, as Herbert Bayer tried to shape this particular campus, Right? He was also attentive. I don't think he was a mystic the way Schweitzer might have been, but he was attentive to the way in which the built environment could reflect and redirect our experience of the natural world rather than being a barrier to it. Anything you want to add? And then we'll take some more questions. Yeah.
Just to Bill's question again, when Schweitzer became a physician, he applied to one aid agency, which was a religious one, and he was interviewed, and despite his celebrity and renown, he was rejected because he was not dogmatic enough. So he followed his own precepts. As to your desire to bring the Schweitzer message to your children, very admirable. That's where it has to begin. I would recommend taking the book, the Schweitzer book that I wrote, and going out to a place that's quiet in a natural setting and just read a couple of Schweitzer's quotes and see if you can have a conversation with your children about what it is to be moral, what it is to be committed to an ethic, what it means to serve, to be self-sacrificing in the interest of others. And as far as Schweitzer and AI, I think he'd be alarmed. I think he would be alarmed that that information is soulless unless it's given a context that has meaning, and meaning in action. Because without action, words are vacant. There's nothing to them. As again, Schweitzer, my life is my argument.
Thank you. We've got a couple more questions in the back up here too, so 3.
It was further to the AI point of the responsibility that we have in terms of ethics. And it was just, we're at this kind of cusp, and I feel like this event is a bit about that idea of being human and taking on board a responsibility and reflecting back, and here we are looking forward. And in terms of how we choose to implement AI, it could really transform the human experience and really solve a lot of the problems around the world, but then it also could actually, as we see, make them a lot worse. So just as we said, this was going to be a bit of a conversation about how, from an ethical point of view, can we connect to the reality of this responsibility and potentially not just sit back, and really take that on board.
Thank you. Stephen?
I need your guys' help. And I don't know if there's 2 people on the planet better than you equipped to do this. I need a new, short definition of the Aspen Idea. And here are the rules. You get 1 sentence, one semicolon, and a period at the end.
I'm giving that one to Paul.
I'll ask a simpler question. What would Schweitzer say to leaders today that demonstrate a lack of empathy towards humanity?
I will start with Stephen unless you want to.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, the last question about what would Schweitzer say to leaders who demonstrate a lack of empathy? Did I get the question right? Yeah. The one sentence, I think, Stephen, would be, and by the way, if you haven't seen Stephen Wick's presentation on why Goethe, reflecting on the 1949 bicentennial, I highly recommend it to you. But the sentence would be, where do you go to confront the difficulty of the human spirit? We can say more about that, but...
Okay, mine would be the nurturing of the whole person. Period.
Well, next time we'll do it in haiku, maybe. But as I said, Schweitzer's address here, you can listen to it in both French and German if you want, or you can read it in English. He talks a lot about Goethe as a scholar would talk about Goethe, but as you get to the end of his lecture here in the original Eros, Aaron, Intent, he leans heavily into kindness and an ethic rooted in kindness, with love being the highest, kindness being the highest expression of truth and love. And I think he would say that leadership that doesn't have empathy is not leadership. And I will confess, having even run leadership seminars for 17 years here at the Institute, I was always uncomfortable with the language of leadership, except in this way. Because it seems to me that leadership is really we often think about leaders as having titles and all of this. We're all leaders in the sense that the problem of leadership, the difficulty of the human spirit, is how we use the power that we have. And some of us have more power and less power institutionally, socially, but all of us have power in one degree or another in sort of the sphere that we occupy. And so to exercise power without empathy is to dehumanize the other person. And in dehumanizing the other person, we're also dehumanizing ourselves. And so I'll use the language of leadership so long as we recognize that the leadership of others requires first that we lead ourselves. And I think Schweitzer was a great exemplar of self-criticism, but almost in the Aristotelian sense, not in the Calvinist sense that in some sense he was trying to escape, right? Not the self-abnegation, but a recognition that we act, we reflect, we revise our actions and try to do better. And that is the kind of task of a lifetime. And if AI can help us do that, that's great. And I think one of the challenges, and it goes back to the opening of the program that I read before, that if we think our problems are only technological, then we're looking only for technological fixes. But if we think we're dealing with the difficulty of the human spirit, then we need to situate the technological power that we have, whether it's nuclear or chemical or now digital, in a broader ethic that has a vision of the human person and the human personality and says, as Martin Luther King does, anything that we do that uplifts the human personality is just. Anything that we do that degrades the human personality is unjust. And technology, I mean, all the tools that we have can go in either direction.
Yeah, I think Schweitzer said and believed that the advances of technology have exceeded the advances in moral guidance and moral development of humanity. So he would say that technology and humanism are out of step a bit, but that's been the challenge. I mean, ever since the Institute was founded in the late 40s, how do you cope with the technology of destruction? And technologies can be used for good and evil, obviously, but that's the big challenge, is to try to align a moral, ethical stance with the technology that we control.
Thanks. We need to wrap up here in a second. And Crystal, I've forgotten, do you want to have a closing word before Paul and I? Well, Paul and I will wrap up and give you the last word. But anything else you want to share before we wrap up, Paul?
Just the whole idea, the whole circumstance that brought Schweitzer here, that brought the Aspen Institute to birth, the Aspen Idea. I mean, it's all miraculous to me. History is a revelation, which is why I so love to write about it, because the more I understand about it, the richer is my experience in a place. And Aspen is such an unusual example of human agency. And I mean, it goes back 1.4 billion years to the geological structure that underlies this place. That's what made Aspen a mining city, an industrial city. That's what makes us a ski mountain. That's what brought people here and continues to do so. There is a challenge here, though. Mortimer Adler, who was the resident philosopher of the Aspen Institute, he said there are two competing triads in Aspen: the Platonic, meaning the good, the true, and the beautiful, and the Machiavellian, meaning money, fame, and power. Those two triads are in competition in the world today. We can see it everywhere. And one of the conclusions of Aspen is that the Machiavellian is here because the Platonic is here as well. So is there a balance? Is it appropriate? I think it goes back and forth like a pendulum. The revival of Albert Schweitzer is an effort to reinstate the Platonic. So whatever we can do as apostles in that interest is what we need to do.
And I would build on that simply by saying in his concluding remarks in 1949, Robert Maynard Hutchins quoted Goethe and said, now that we are so well met, let us not lead trivial lives. And I think one of the challenges that we face in this intersection of the Platonic and Machiavellian triads is that there's so much, we're so rich with material things that the possibilities of leading trivial lives are exponential. And so to be at a place, to be in a location where we're reminded that those two triads are in contest with one another is a challenge for us to live more meaningful rather than trivial lives. Over to you, Crystal.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Todd. Thanks to all of you for being here. And before I get to my reminders and announcements, you mentioned Martin Luther King. Yesterday, I had one of the most amazing days of my life. I got to meet Martin Luther King's daughter here in the lobby. I just happened to be able to go out and help her. She was in town for our action forum, and I bowed down to her and gave her our thanks and honored her and welcomed her back. So to your point, how magical and special this place is. So announcements. Lunch is now served over in the Koch building. Please join us. We have a little gift for you over there. Please come back for the 1 o'clock panel here in the auditorium. And then we have several things going on at 2 o'clock. We have a curator tour at the Beyer Center. We have Paul Andersen leading a tour over at the Beyer Center. We have Ann Mullins leading a tour starting at the Beyer Center. And we have a flash seminar with Todd Breyfogle. So please join us. Tonight at 5, we have the David Brooks talk, and it is fully subscribed right now. But if you come and if you aren't registered, come and get on the wait list. If we have a wait list at that point, but please do join us. So thanks for being here. Bravo.